and the world thinks we are animals. They see the leather vests, the tattoos, the roar of the engines, and they lock their car doors when we pull up next to them at a red light. They clutch their purses a little tighter. They tell their children not to look, and they think we are chaos. They think we are destruction. But they don't know the code. There is a line in the sand that you do not cross with the Motor Mafia, and you don't hurt children, you don't abuse women, and you never ever disrespect the elderly. And because while the rest of the world sees an old lady walking slowly across the street and honks their horn in impatience, we see our mothers. We see our grandmothers, and we see the history that built this world. And when 90-year-old Martha called my burner phone, crying so hard she could barely breathe, and I didn't ask who was bothering her. I didn't ask if she had called the police. I just asked one question. Are you hurt? And when she said she was scared, and 50 engines fired up across the city at the exact same moment, the man standing on her porch thought he was dealing with a helpless widow, and he thought he could throw her life into the street like trash. He didn't know that Martha wasn't alone. He didn't know that he had just kicked a hornet's nest, and by the time the sun went down, he would learn that some leases are signed in ink, but others are enforced in blood. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and the kind of day that feels lazy and slow. Martha lived in a small, white house with a blue porch at the end of Elm Street. It wasn't a mansion, and the paint was peeling in a few spots, and the roof needed a patch, but it was the most beautiful house in the neighborhood because of the garden, and Martha had planted those roses with her husband, George, back in 1950. George had been gone for 20 years now, but Martha still tended those roses every single morning. That house was her memory box. Every scratch on the floorboards had a story, and every picture on the mantel was a moment frozen in time. She had lived there for 60 years. She planned to die there. But Mr. Draven had other plans, and Draven was a developer. He wore suits that cost more than Martha's car, and he had a smile that looked like a shark smelling blood in the water, and he had bought the land around Martha's house 3 months ago. He wanted to build luxury condos, glass and steel towers for people who didn't know their neighbors' names, and he had bullied everyone else on the block into selling. But Martha said no. She was sitting in her kitchen, drinking a cup of Earl Grey tea, and her hands shaking slightly as she held the china cup. It was her good china, the set George bought her for their 30th anniversary. Suddenly, a fist pounded on the front door. It wasn't a knock. It was a demand. Martha jumped, spilling hot tea on her floral tablecloth. She knew who it was, and she grabbed her cane and walked slowly to the door. Her joints hurt when it rained, and it looked like a storm was brewing. She opened the door just a crack, and Draven was standing there, checking his gold watch. He wasn't alone. 2 large men in moving uniforms stood behind him, their arms crossed. They didn't look like movers, and they looked like bouncers. Mrs. Higgins, Draven said, not bothering to look at her. Today is the day. You have 1 hour to vacate the premises. And Martha's heart hammered in her chest. Mr. Draven, we went over this, she said, her voice trembling but holding a shred of dignity. And my lease doesn't expire until the end of the year. I have rights. I have lived here since before you were born. Draven laughed. It was a cold, dry sound, and that lease was with the previous owner, he said, stepping forward and pushing the door open. He didn't touch her, but he invaded her space, forcing her to step back. And I bought the deed last week. There was a clause, a renovation clause, which means you are trespassing on my property. He snapped his fingers. Boys, help her pack. And by pack, I mean get this junk out of my house. No, Martha whispered. You can't, please. I have nowhere to go. Draven ignored her, and he walked past her into the living room. He looked around with disgust. It smells like old people in here, he muttered, and he picked up a framed photograph from the side table. It was a black and white picture of George in his army uniform. Draven looked at it for a second, and then tossed it onto the sofa like it was garbage. Get moving, he barked at his men. Everything goes on the lawn. If she doesn't have a truck in an hour, and call the dumpster company. One of the big men grabbed Martha's favorite armchair, the one she sat in to knit scarves for the homeless shelter, and dragged it toward the door. The sound of the wooden legs scraping against the hardwood floor sounded like a scream to Martha. Stop it, she cried out, and grabbing the man's arm. Her grip was weak, her skin like paper. The man shook her off effortlessly. Move, lady, he grunted. You're in the way. Martha stumbled back, and she hit her hip against the wall and gasped in pain. She wasn't just losing her house. She was losing her dignity. She was being erased. Draven walked into the kitchen, and he opened the cupboards and started sweeping her plates into a cardboard box. He wasn't being careful. Crash. Crack, the sound of breaking china filled the small house. And my tea set, Martha sobbed, tears finally spilling down her wrinkled cheeks. That was George's. Draven didn't stop. He didn't care about George, and he didn't care about memories. He cared about square footage and profit margins. He turned to her, holding a broken saucer. You should have taken the offer, Martha. And now you leave with nothing. Go sit on the porch while we finish, or I'll have the police drag you out for trespassing. Martha turned and walked out the front door, and she couldn't watch. She couldn't watch them destroy her life. She sat on the rocking chair on the porch, the same chair where she used to rock her babies to sleep, and she watched the gray clouds gathering above. She felt small. She felt invisible. That's what happens when you get old. You become a ghost before you even die, and people look right through you. She reached into her pocket for a tissue, but her fingers brushed against something else. Her phone. It was an old flip phone, and simple and durable. She had taped a piece of paper to the back of it with 2 numbers. One was for the ambulance, and the other was a number a young man had given her 5 years ago. She remembered that day. A young biker had broken down in front of her house in the heat of summer, and while other neighbors peered through their blinds, suspicious and fearful, Martha had walked out with a pitcher of ice, cold lemonade, and a slice of apple pie. The biker, and a giant of a man with a beard like a Viking, had looked at her like she was an angel. He had fixed his bike, eaten the pie, and before he left, and he wrote a number down for her. If anyone ever bothers you, Grandma, you call this number, day or night. You ask for Jack's S. She had never called it, and she didn't want to be a bother. But looking at Draven's car parked on her roses, hearing the sound of her life being shattered inside, she opened the phone, and her fingers shook as she dialed. Ring. Yeah. A deep, rough voice answered. There was wind in the background, the sound of an engine. Hello? Martha whispered. And, is this Jax? The engine noise stopped instantly. Grandma Martha, is that you? Everything okay? No, she sobbed, her voice cracking. No, Jax. They're here, and they're throwing me out. He broke George's picture. He's hurting my house. There was a silence on the other end of the line, and a silence so heavy it felt like the air pressure dropped. Who is doing this? Jax asked. His voice wasn't loud. It was deadly quiet. A man named Draven. She wept. And he says I have an hour. Please? I don't know what to do. You don't do anything? Jax said. You go sit on that porch. You drink your lemonade. And you wait. And wait for what? Wait for the family. Jax said. Stay on the line, Martha. I want to hear everything. I was 30 miles away when the call came in, and I was riding with Big Mac and the boys, heading back to the clubhouse after a charity run. The moment I heard Martha crying, the world turned red. You have to understand, and Martha isn't just a lady who gave me pie. Martha is the only person in this town who waves at us with all 5 fingers. And when the town council tried to ban motorcycles from Main Street, Martha showed up at the meeting in her Sunday best and scolded the mayor until he turned beet red. And she is the grandmother of the club. And nobody touches family. I pulled up next to Big Mac at the traffic light. I didn't have to explain much, and I just pointed to the phone and said 2 words. Martha. Trouble. Mac's eyes narrowed behind his sunglasses. He revved his engine. It was a signal, a war cry, and he tapped his helmet, signaling the rest of the pack. Turn around. Back at the house, Draven was feeling good. He walked out onto the porch, lighting a cigar, and he blew the smoke toward Martha. She coughed, waving it away. 30 minutes left, Martha. Draven smirked. Better call a taxi. And, unless you plan on sleeping in the park. One of the movers walked out carrying a box of clothes. He dropped it on the grass. A few sweaters spilled out into the dirt, and, oops. The mover laughed. Martha clutched her cane. You are a cruel man, she said softly. I'm a businessman, Draven corrected. And you are in the way of progress. And suddenly Draven stopped. He cocked his head. Do you hear that? He asked. It started as a low rumble, like distant thunder. But the sky wasn't breaking, and the ground was shaking. The water in the puddle by the curb started to ripple. The sound grew louder, deeper. It wasn't one engine, and it was a symphony of pistons and chrome. Draven looked down the street. His smug smile faltered. What is that? He muttered. Martha looked up. She wiped her eyes, and a small, hopeful smile touched her lips. That, she said, her voice stronger now, is my grandson. You don't have a grandson, Draven snapped. And records show you have no living relatives. I have plenty of relatives, Martha said. They just don't share my last name. Then, they appeared. Around the corner, and a sea of black leather and chrome flooded Elm Street. It was a tidal wave of metal. At the front was Jax riding his custom Harley. Next to him was Big Mac, and looking like a mountain on wheels. Behind them, 50 bikers filled the entire width of the road. They didn't stop at the stop sign. They didn't slow down. And They rolled toward the house like a thunderstorm touching down on Earth. If you believe that elders should be protected at all costs, hit that like button right now. And let's show the world that respect still exists. And if you want to see what happens when a bully meets a force of nature, subscribe to the channel. And because class is about to be in session, Draven dropped his cigar. The ash burned a hole in his expensive shoe, but he didn't notice. His eyes were wide and fixed on the army descending upon him. The bikers slowed down as they reached the house, circling the property like wolves surrounding their prey. And they parked on the street. They parked on the sidewalk. They parked directly behind Draven's luxury car, blocking him in completely. The engines cut out one by one, and leaving a ringing silence in the air. 50 kickstands went down. 50 men stepped off their bikes. Draven took a step back, bumping into the front door. "What? And what is this?" he stammered. "Who are you people?" Jax walked up the driveway first. He wasn't rushing. He walked with the heavy and measured steps of a man who knows exactly what he is going to do. He stopped at the foot of the porch stairs. He looked at the box of clothes dumped in the dirt, and he looked at the broken picture frame on the lawn. Then, he looked at Martha. "Afternoon, Grandma," Jax said gently. "Sorry we're late. Traffic was a bitch." And Martha stood up, trembling. "He broke George's cup, Jax. He threw my sweaters in the mud." Jax's expression didn't change, but his eyes went cold, and he turned his head slowly to look at Draven. "You broke the cup?" Jax asked. His voice was conversational, almost polite. Draven swallowed hard, and he tried to puff up his chest, trying to regain his authority. "Look, I don't know who you are, but this is private property. I have the deed. I have the law on my side." And Big Mac stepped up beside Jax. He cracked his knuckles. The sound was like a gunshot. "We aren't lawyers," Mac rumbled. "We're the movers." "Movers," Draven squeaked. "And yeah," Jax said, taking a step up onto the porch. He towered over Draven. "We're here to help move the trash off the property." And he reached out and flicked the lapel of Draven's suit. "And right now, you're looking pretty trashy." Draven stared at Jax, and his face cycling through shades of red and purple. He looked at the 50 bikers standing silently on the lawn, arms crossed, waiting for a command. And he looked at his 2 hired goons, who had suddenly lost a lot of their confidence. They were big, sure, but they weren't. "Fight 50 outlaws. Big, and you're threatening me." Draven hissed, trying to keep his voice steady. "Do you know who I am? I own half this town." Jax didn't blink, and he reached into his pocket and pulled out a pack of cigarettes. He tapped one out, lit it, and took a long drag. "I don't care if you own the moon, pal, and you made an old lady cry. In my book, that makes you worthless." Jax turned his back on Draven, the ultimate insult. He looked at the bikers. "Boys!" he shouted. "And we got a situation here. The lady's furniture is outside. It needs to be inside. And this trash," he pointed a thumb over his shoulder at Draven and his men, "and is inside the property line. It needs to be outside." The Motor Mafia moved like a single organism. 20 men stepped forward toward the furniture scattered on the lawn, and they didn't drag it like the movers had. They picked up the armchair gently, dusting off the dirt. 2 burly bikers, guys who looked like they chewed glass for breakfast, and picked up the box of knitting supplies with extreme care. "Hey, put that down! That is evictable property," he signaled to his lead bodyguard, and a guy with a shaved head and a scar on his neck. "Stop them." Earned bodyguard stepped forward, pulling a telescoping baton from his belt, and he snapped it open. "Back off," he growled, swinging it toward a young bikered rat who was holding a lamp. "That was the mistake, and you don't pull a weapon on a patch holder unless you're ready to die." Before the baton could even whistle through the air, Big Mac was there, and he moved with a speed that defied his size. He caught the bodyguard's wrist in mid-swing. The sound of the impact was a dull thud. Mac didn't say a word. He just squeezed, and the bodyguard's eyes went wide. He dropped the baton. Mac twisted the man's arm behind his back and marched him toward the street. "And we said we're taking out the trash," Mac growled. He shoved the man. The bodyguard stumbled, tripped over the curb, and landed face first in the muddy gutter. And the second bodyguard saw this, looked at the 49 other bikers, and made a smart career choice. He put his hands up, backed away, and went to join his friend in the gutter. Now it was just Draven, alone, surrounded. Jax walked back up the stairs. He stood nose to nose with the developer. "And you broke a tea set," Jax said quietly. 1950. "Anniversary gift. I'll write a check." Draven stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "I'll pay for it. And double." "Some things you can't pay for," Jax said. He pointed at the shattered porcelain on the kitchen floor visible through the open door. "Pick it up, and, excuse me, up." Jax's voice dropped an octave. "Every shard, every piece, you clean her floor." Now, Draven looked around for help, and The neighbors were watching from their windows. The bikers were watching from the lawn. Martha was watching from her rocking chair, clutching her cane. Trembling, and the man in the $1,000 suit got down on his knees. He crawled into the kitchen. With shaking hands, he began to pick up the sharp pieces of broken china, and he cut his finger on a shard. He winced, but he didn't stop. Jack stood in the doorway watching him like a hawk. "You missed a piece," Jack said. Draven scrambled to get it, and when the floor was clean, Jax grabbed Draven by the back of his collar and hauled him up. He marched him out to the porch. "Now," Jack said, addressing the crowd, "and this man claims he has a deed. He claims this is his house." Jax reached into Draven's jacket pocket and pulled out the folded legal document. He held it up, and, "Is this it?" "Yes," Draven said, trying to sound tough. "And it's legally binding. You tear that up, and I'll sue you for everything you have." Jax smiled, and it was a terrifying smile. "I'm not going to tear it up. I believe in the law." He handed the paper back to Draven. "But here's the thing," Jax continued. "This house, and it's old. It needs a lot of repairs. The wiring is bad. The pipes are rusty." He leaned in close to Draven's ear. "And if you move in, or if you try to demolish it, and accidents happen, pipes burst, wires spark. Sometimes heavy machinery just stops working. Sometimes construction sites become very unsafe." Jax looked at the row of 50 bikers. They were all cracking their knuckles, staring at Draven. "My boys are very clumsy," Jax whispered. "If you try to build anything on this land, it's going to be a nightmare. You'll lose money every single day. We will be here, watching, waiting." And Draven looked at the wall of leather and muscle. He did the math. He realized that no contractor in this state would work on a site that was protected by the Motor Mafia, and his investment was dead. "Fine," Draven spat, "keep the damn house. It's a tear down anyway." "We're not done," Jack said. Draven gritted his teeth, and he looked at Martha. She looked so small in her chair, but with the bikers behind her, she looked like a queen on her throne. "I'm sorry," Draven mumbled, and, louder, the bikers roared in unison. "I'm sorry," Draven screamed. "Get out," Martha said softly. Draven ran to his car, but there was a problem, and his luxury sedan was boxed in by 20 motorcycles. "Move your bikes," he yelled. "Can't," Rat shouted back, grinning. "Lost my keys." "Me too," another biker laughed. "And, engine trouble. Looks like you're walking, boss," Jax called out. Draven kicked his tire in frustration, cursed, and started the long walk down the road, and his expensive shoes squelching in the mud, his bodyguards limping behind him. The neighborhood erupted in cheers, and the neighbors who had been too scared to speak up came out onto their porches, clapping. We spent the rest of the afternoon fixing up the place, and Mac fixed the porch railing. Rat mowed the lawn. The boys put every piece of furniture back exactly where Martha wanted it. We even glued the tea saucer back together, and it wasn't perfect, it had cracks running through it, but Martha put it back on the shelf and said it was even more beautiful now because it had a story. And as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the garden, Martha came out with a fresh pitcher of lemonade and a tray of cookies. She walked up to me, and I was sitting on the steps, wiping grease off my hands. She didn't say anything at first. She just reached out and cupped my bearded face in her fragile hands. "And, thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me, Grandma," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You made me pie once, we're even." She smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "And, you're good boys. The world doesn't see it, but I do." We rode away as the streetlights flickered on. I looked back in my mirror. Martha was standing on her porch and waving. Her house was safe. Her dignity was intact. We are the Motor Mafia. We might be outlaws, we might be sinners, but we know one thing for sure, and you respect your elders, because they fought the wars, built the roads, and raised the families that allow us to ride free. And if anyone forgets that, well, and we'll be there to remind them. This is Jax signing off.